Mohammed Morsi's trial has been adjourned to January. The deposed president's brief appearance in court early in the week was characterized by defiance and high drama after he refused to play by the rules. Now, Egypt is bracing for a historic trial that will not only fully test the capabilities of its justice system, but also its sense of nationhood. Well, joining us to discuss more on this development in Egypt earlier on in the week is Mr. Khaled Daoud. Is joining us there from Cairo, and he is the spokesperson of the Constitution Party there in Egypt. Daoud has also served as the spokesperson for the National Salvation Front. And also joining us on the program from Washington is Dr Edmund Ghareeb, an expert in Middle Eastern affairs. But first, let's take a look at the events before and during Mohammed Morsi's brief court appearance.
This was the first public appearance for Egypt's ousted president in 4 months. And the authorities were determined to ensure Mohammed Morsi's big outing was reported on their terms. A limited number of journalists was allowed into court. Mona Ashmawi was among them.
The police were more than in Mubarak's trial. They frisked us 3 times. I've never seen something this extensive. Even the most common belongings were checked. They confiscated a pen. It turned out to be a recorder. Their eyes were wide open.
This was the video the authorities released. Morsi getting out of the car before he heads into court. One psychologist says it shows a lot about Morsi's state of mind.
The way he stood to tidy his looks and wearing a regular suit rather than white prison outfit like the other Brotherhood members shows that he is still in the denial phase. He still thinks he is the president.
Once in court, Morsi went on the attack from the start of the session. He shouted, quote, "I am the legitimate president of this country. I hold you responsible. You are the judge of the military junta."
Morsi looked very angry. He tried to give a speech, but the judge stopped him from doing so. When he turned to the defendants, asking them if they were present, none of them responded, "I am present." They replied with criticizing the trial and the interim government.
The other defendants, all members of the Muslim Brotherhood, also tried to keep the focus on Morsi.
All defendants gave their back to the courtroom except Morsi. He faced the cameras. They wanted to give all the attention to Morsi, to promote the concept that he is the leader. It's an opposite of what they used to do when he was in power.
The judge called a recess to try and calm tempers, and a little later he postponed the proceedings. Mohammed Morsi refused to recognize the authority of the court or of the man who ousted him. Egypt may have moved on these past 4 months, but Morsi has dug in. He's due back in court on January 8, and many expect that he will remain defiant. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
All right, Mohammed Morsi's trial has been adjourned to January. First in Washington, Dr Edmund Ghareeb. Now, the trial of Mohammed Morsi was adjourned this week to January. First of all, though, did you expect it to take this turn?
I think it was clear that there was going to be a great deal of tension, and there were also some threats from the Muslim Brotherhood that they were going to demonstrate in the streets to protest what they consider to be an illegal overthrow, a coup d'etat, in fact. But so far it was calmer than was expected, and I think it's also a matter of time before we begin to see at least a process in these elections, because I think of this trial, because the trial is going to continue for a long time, since there are a number of charges that appear likely to be leveled against the former president. Some of it has to do with mismanagement, with corruption, with escaping from prison, and a number of other issues. So this will not be a matter of months or even a year. It may even take years.
All right, Dr Ghareeb, though, he hasn't been seen in public since July, though, and he's facing a myriad of charges there. I mean, he's accused of violence, murder, conspiring with Hamas. You know, he could possibly face the death penalty there. Does this trial, though, at the beginning, have a legal basis?
Well, clearly, in a way, it has as much legal basis as did the trial of President Mubarak. I mean, what we are seeing in Egypt over the last 3 years, we've seen unprecedented events where the people or large segments of the population, with the support of the military, overthrew 2 presidents. There are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between the trials of both Mubarak and Morsi. For Mubarak, for example, there was a lack of evidence on the one hand, maybe because of the failure of the security and the police to present the evidence that was needed. President Mubarak, or former President Mubarak, decided, although he resisted the court in some way and what happened, but generally speaking, he was part of the trial. He agreed to defend himself legally, maybe because he believed that the evidence against him was weak for a variety of reasons, and therefore he decided to move in that direction. With President Morsi, however, or the former president, he rejected this. He refused to wear the prison clothes. His followers continue to insist that he is a legitimate president and that the process that overthrew him was illegal. So this was a very different kind of response, and the trial, however, we'll have to wait and see how it evolves once it begins.
All right, we'll stay with that defiance there by former President Morsi for the moment, though. Khaled Daoud in Cairo, well, the opening of that trial itself was marked by former President Morsi's defiance there in court. What do you make of that defiance of former President Morsi?
Well, I think the defiant message was mainly for his own supporters and not for the rest of the Egyptian people, many of whom were relatively satisfied to see the former president in court, this time facing only one charge, which is the killing of a number of demonstrators in front of his palace who were protesting his policies on December 5th. Again, for many Egyptians, he sent us the message that he's again only the president of the Muslim Brotherhood group. He came in repeating their own slogans, raising the signal of Rab'a al-Adawiyya, which is the place they had their sit-in for almost a month and a half. So again, for many people, he also seemed to be living in a state of denial. For his supporters, it was a big deal that he did not wear the prison uniform. But I think in January he will have no choice but to be in a prison uniform. I think these are only cosmetic matters. The reality of the situation is that the new regime in Egypt has now turned a new page. There seems to be no room anymore for compromise because of the trial opening and facing such serious charges. So I think for many people, President Morsi did not send a defiant message, but a message of someone who's living in a state of denial and refusing to admit the realities on the ground.
All right, Khaled, we saw though earlier in the week during former President Morsi's trial, though, we saw during the week that it was a lot calmer in Egypt. There were fewer people on the streets and so forth. What impact is that trial likely to have on the political climate in Egypt?
Well, I think it sent a relatively measure of confidence for the current regime, is that the Brotherhood, and despite their massive threats before the trial that they will turn Egypt upside down, that they will burn the country, at the end of the day, when matters came for real, there were only a few thousand protesters here and there. So hopefully the new regime, at least supported by the military, they are hoping to proceed with the roadmap. The most important challenge in the upcoming roadmap that will guarantee the new regime some legitimacy is agreement on a new constitution. If they manage to finish, the committee that's drafting the constitution finish on time and put it to vote, this will definitely give the new regime a new legitimacy. But as long as we don't have a ballot box supporting the new regime, their position will remain to be weak, and I'm sure the Brotherhood will continue their acts of resistance between now and the day we have the referendum on the new constitution.
All right, Dr. Ghareeb, you've heard what Daoud has said there regarding the already polarized society, though. Do you think Morsi's trial is likely to have much impact, though, on the political climate? Is the Muslim Brotherhood still very relevant there in Egypt?
Clearly, it's going to have an impact. There is no doubt about it, particularly as long as we don't see any real reconciliation beginning, as long as the polarization continues. But one interesting point, I think this time, 2 points actually. One, I think as long as the Muslim Brotherhood continues to be in denial or rejecting the current order I think we're likely to see continued tension, and that is going to create a problem. The second thing that I find very interesting, and the difference, one of the differences between the trial of Mubarak and the trial of Morsi, is that when the trial of Mubarak took place, a lot of people were excited. They were following it. They could look at this as perhaps also the beginning of a way to deal with senior officials, even presidents, that they could be tried once they commit violations of the law or oppress their own people. I think now there is less interest in this. Part of it has to do because of the state of insecurity that seemed to exist in Egypt, and because of the threats that the supporters of the Brotherhood made, and because the media in Egypt sometimes also exaggerated this threat. So people are much more focused about and worried about the state of security. And I think what Khaled mentioned concerning the constitution is extremely important. Unless we have a constitution and that appears to be legitimate, represents the views of all segments of the Egyptian population, and until we see fair elections for the parliament, for the presidency, I think there will be tension and polarization.
All right, Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, we'll leave it there for the moment. Edmund Ghareeb joining us there from Washington, and from Cairo, Khaled Daoud, spokesperson for the Constitution Party. Do stay with us. We'll return in a moment. Welcome back to the program. So what does Morsi's trial portend for the Brotherhood? Is it the last nail in the Brotherhood's coffin, as some commentators have put it? Well, still with us here from Cairo is Khaled Daoud. In Washington, D.C. is Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, and we're now joined by Dr. Fareed El-Shayyal. He's a member of the advisory board at the Center for Islamic Studies, School of Oriental and African Studies. He's joining us from London. Dr. Fareed El-Shayyal, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to start off with you, though. Former President Morsi appeared in the dock this week along 14 other Brotherhood members. Some 2,000 others are also under arrest. Some say this is the end of the Muslim Brotherhood. Is it?
No, it's not the end, of course. Muslim Brotherhood is one of the largest reform movements in the Muslim world that has been for 85 years working, and its membership not in Egypt only, but all around the Muslim world in millions. So it is a big idea, aims to reform the Muslim world, and it will not die. Ideas don't die. Maybe there will be great restrictions, a lot of repression and persecution in Egypt, and they are used to that. They have been subject to it over the 85 years, but they are coming out of every crisis bigger and stronger, and I'm sure that they will cope with that this time.
All right. Dr. Fareed, let me just get your understanding of what happened in court this week. What do you make of former President Morsi's defiance in court? What do you make of his appearance actually in court?
The illegitimate coup d'etat in Egypt has no legitimacy and has no basis whatsoever. And President Morsi truly considers himself the legitimate, elected, democratically civil president of Egypt. And constitutionally, he's still in power, supposed to be in power. So there is no point for the court to examine or to try him. Secondly, even if we leave the constitutional viewpoint aside, the Egyptian criminal law has been violated by the coup authority and by this particular court, because has not been respected. All the procedures taken in order to prepare for the trial were against the law, and it violated every single item of the law, starting from the arrest or the disappearance of the Morsi in the desert, taking him prisoner or captive without any warning or without any court order, and investigating or in the jail, which is against the law. The law is supposed to be that the accused to be brought to the public prosecution office, where he is interrogated. But on the contrary, the judge was taken blindfolded to the desert in unknown place, where he asked the president, and the president refused to answer. So the file in front of the judge in the court is empty, it has no substance.
All right, Khaled, you've heard what Dr. Fareed there has said. There is no validity in law with the Morsi's appearance in court. Do you agree? And secondly, this is not the end of the Muslim Brotherhood, according to Dr. Shayyal. Your response?
Well, unfortunately, I disagree very much with the gentleman speaking from London, because he also seems to be living in a state of denial, like the Muslim Brotherhood group here. I mean, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood have been dealt a very strong blow. I mean, there is no question, as he said, that ideas do not disappear. This is a group that's been around for 85 years, but presenting a very bad model in ruling a very important country such as Egypt will definitely have an effect on the reputation of the Muslim Brotherhood in the entire region, let alone the entire world. Again, you know, we were hoping that former President Morsi would be acting as a president for all Egyptians, but he acted as a president for only a political group, which is the Muslim Brotherhood group. I also disagree very much with the doctor speaking from London by saying that the judge was taken to the former president blindfolded. This is a myth or a story that the Brotherhood created in their own media, and there is no way to confirm it. Indeed, the former president said in one of the leaked recordings that he asked the judge where he was, and the judge responded that he did not know where he was. And that judge was not the only person taken to the location where former President Morsi was being held. There was Mrs. Catherine Ashton, the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs. There were a number of African leaders. There was a human rights group that was taken to see the president, and none of them said that they were blindfolded. This was an exceptional measure for security procedure, and the former president was indeed kept at a secret location due to security reasons. But after that, the judges and the prosecutors moved to try to question him, but he repeatedly refused to recognize the new order. And at the end of the day, we all have to be sure that the Egyptian judiciary is more keen to maintain its independence and its reputation more than anybody else. And if the evidence presented against former President Morsi are not proper, he will be acquitted, exactly like many other cases has been acquitted by the Egyptian judiciary. So we'd better not repeat some lies and then believe those lies.
I'll bring you back in, Dr. Fareed, though the Muslim Brotherhood presented, I beg your pardon, former President Morsi, according to Khaled Daoud, they presented a bad model of leadership, and that in the end, he probably brought this upon himself. Your response?
From day one, the anti-revolution was at work, and it aimed to not only to topple Dr. Morsi, but to prove to the Egyptian people that they were wrong to revolt against despotism of President Mubarak, and to prove that democracy is not good for the Egyptian people, and to bring back the military junta which ruled the country over 60 years. And this was enhanced by the collaboration with certain regional powers and international powers who does not want to see the Egyptian people possessing their own political will and going on the right track of democracy to build a modern and strong Egypt. And that's why throughout the year or less of being in power, Dr. Morsi has faced 4,000 plus protests and disruptions of strikes which prevented him from working, and the anti-work done by military, by security force, the interior, by the judicial system and the media. Four big elements of the deep state which collaborated against the choice of the Egyptian people and tried to show that it is a failure, and unfortunately they crippled Dr. Morsi and his team from working absolutely, and then they claimed that he failed. He was not failed. He was made to fail by the anti-revolution powers.
Where does this leave, though, the question of democracy? I mean, Egypt has now had a brief attempt at electoral democracy. Where does this leave Egypt's democracy?
It leaves it in a very dark tunnel because the military junta didn't waste any time. The so-called committee of amending the constitution have omitted one single item which prohibit the interference of the state in the election. And that suggests that there is a determination on the part of the junta to interfere with the elections. Secondly, according to the so-called roadmap, there's supposed to be national reconciliation and national rapprochement among the different powers, political powers in the society. On the contrary, the junta has been persecuting the Muslim Brothers, had killed more than 5,000 people in cold blood, and have jailed 20,000 people and injured thousands of people. Secondly, or thirdly, the judiciary, which is supposed to be in charge of supervision of the elections, is now extremely heavy burden with thousands and thousands of cases and backlog of 3 years from pre-Mubarak end time, and that will make it unable to supervise properly any elections. And with the military and the security forces in thousands and hundreds of thousands in the street, I expect the worst, no democracy whatsoever.
All right, Khaled, to you there is no more democracy in Egypt.
Well, I think, again, the gentleman in London is mispresenting a lot of facts. First of all, the easiest thing is to avoid any blame or avoid the fact that the former President Morsi made a lot of mistakes and then claim it's the other side who's always failed the former president from carrying out his job. He said that he has the right to issue whatever laws he wants, that he will write the constitution the way he wants, that the Shura Council or the upper house of parliament, its decisions cannot be appealed. And after that, he made fights with the judiciary, he made fights with the media, he made fights with the Christian minority in Egypt, he made fights with everybody, left himself no friends at all. And it's not totally accurate to say that 5,000 of the Muslim Brotherhood supporters were killed. This is a trivialization by the Muslim Brotherhood themselves of the lives of their followers. There are no figures like that at all. The figure is big, you know, there are hundreds, but not 5,000. And we better be accurate about this because we're dealing with human lives. Again, I've never heard of any such thing, such as that in the constitution, the state will have the right to intervene in elections. I want to assure the gentleman in London that we stood up for Mubarak on January 25th, and we will make sure that we will have a proper constitution that guarantees fair elections. And instead of trying to destroy the lives of millions of Egyptians, it's better for the Brotherhood to try to reintegrate, admit the new reality, admit that June 30 was a popular revolution, and rejoin the nation instead of isolating themselves and showing that they're like a tribe against the entire population. That's the real problem, and the problem is not only a state of continuous denial of major mistakes that the former president has done during his short 1 year in office.
All right, Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, let me bring you here in at the moment. You've heard what the two gentlemen there have said, and now it is another roadmap for Egypt, again, barely a year after the first democratic elections there. What's your take on all this now? I mean, can this roadmap, though, bring about a stabilization of the society? Because it seems right now that Egypt remains quite polarized.
Exactly. I think we have heard two very different versions of what's going on in Egypt. There are very different perspectives. I think a great deal will depend now on, one, what happens with the trial. Are we going to see due process? So far, the new government has been able to establish itself to a certain extent, has been able to create facts on the ground. The challenge is going to be what kind of a constitution are we going to see in Egypt? Are we going to see fair parliamentary and presidential elections? What kind of a relationship are we going to see between the religion and the state in Egypt? What role is there going to be for the different institutions? How independent are they going to be? Are we going to see separation of powers? To a large extent, one of the important things that we saw over the last 2 years is the emergence of the very powerful institutions in Egypt, which even, for example, President Morsi, even though he had a strong movement behind him, he wasn't able to control Al-Azhar, the military, the press, and the judiciary, as well as the labor federations, and these are trying to carve a role for themselves in the future of Egypt, regardless of who is going to be the president and how powerful he's going to be.
We're going to wind up, gentlemen, in a moment, but I want to get your final closing comments there. Dr. Fareed El-Shayyal, I'll start off with you, though. Your predictions on what will happen now on former President Morsi's trial and to Egypt going forward.
Morsi will stay always the symbol of this free will of the Egyptian people, and the good example he managed to give in 1 year, though it is too short, will inspire those who may come to rule Egypt in their mind to achieve the interests of the Egyptian people, not to serve a minority of corrupt liberals or military junta.
All right, Khaled, your final winding up comments there, your predictions on what will happen with the trial and to Egypt moving forward.
The trial will proceed. I think that we're going to see an end of this trial. I'm still hoping that there will be some wise people on behalf of the Brotherhood to recognize that there is a new reality in Egypt, to stop living in a state of denial, to admit that Morsi provided the worst ever model for a president during his year in office. He's not inspiring anyone with anything. He divided the country. He threatened a civil war, and that's why we could not afford to take another 3 years of former President Morsi. I hope that the Brotherhood recognize that lots of people in Egypt are also against them, and that they have to try to reintroduce themselves to the Egyptian public by truly believing in democracy. The road remains open for them if they want to take part in the vote for the new constitution, if they want to take part in the new parliament elections, but according to rules that assure that they will not use violence against their own people. They're trying to turn our life into hell over the past 4 months.
All right, Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, you have the final word on this.
Well, primarily, I think the trial is going to continue for months and maybe longer than that. The challenge is going to be whether or not the two sides in Egypt are going to be able to begin the reconciliation process. I think there is clearly a need for the new government to show that there is rule of law, there is transparency. They also need to begin to resolve Egypt's basic problems, and their elections have to be fair and transparent. For the Brotherhood, I think it's time for them to show that they are also have learned from their experience and to reassess and separate politics from proselytization.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment. Dr. Fareed El-Shayyal, a member of the advisory board at the Center for Islamic Studies, a School of Oriental and African Studies, joining us from London. In Cairo, Khaled Daoud, the spokesperson for the Constitution Party. Daoud has also served as a spokesperson of the National Salvation Front. And from Washington, Dr. Edmund Ghareeb, expert in Middle Eastern affairs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights on the program. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Bye-bye.